I'm Dean Newland, and welcome to the Business of Intuition, where I coach, facilitate, train, and speak on the hard science and meaningful experience of intuitive leadership in business, so you can make better decisions, forge real connections, and creatively solve problems to amplify your impact and simplify your life. Welcome to the Business of Intuition.
A couple of weeks ago, I was doing a workshop with a group of people, and part of it was around the subject of mindfulness. And so I led the group through an activity that essentially got people back into their breathing, and it involved another person massaging one of their arms and taking control of moving that person's arm. And it was a way of being able to trust yourself and trust another person. Very low impact and just a little bit of human contact back and forth. And afterwards, one of the people that was in this workshop said, about 10 years ago, this would have been no big deal for me. But I have to say, just having somebody touch me, even in a way that I gave permission, was uncomfortable. And so on one hand, I loved it because the exercise really revealed where I'm at and my issues regarding fear and trust and breathing and my mindfulness. But on the other hand, I was also somewhat afraid. And so I found that this particular person's response to the exercise was really very much the subject of my next guest's conversation with me on the Business of Intuition, where we really got to dive into this dichotomy of external forces and internal forces that are preventing us from being focused on our highest and best. At the same time, we have a deep desire, a deep hunger for it. So here's the question that I was posing as a result of this conversation, which is our modern world hindering our ability to genuinely connect with ourselves and others? So during my recent interview, my guest Catherine Bell and I delved into this pressing issue, revealing a widespread yearning for deeper human connections amidst the constant distractions of digital devices and social media. Our discussion also underscored the significance of self-connection, intuition, and the cultivation of positive intentions as foundations for nurturing genuine relationships and personal growth. By exploring practices like numerology, astrology, and the Enneagram, the discussion that we had really started to highlight the utility in enhancing self-awareness and improving team dynamics. We also talked about how important it is for leaders to shape the collaboration and inclusivity of company cultures, at the same time being able to provide direction and vision and being able to balance the two together. Catherine Bell is a successful entrepreneur, a business leader, and best-selling business author. She founded BluEra, a Profit 500 executive search and team transformation company, and as a top 200 growing company in Canada, top 50 in Alberta, and best place to work. BluEra was a shining example of the awakened company, which you'll hear more about here in a second. With the sale of BluEra to DHR, Catherine now focuses on awakening the fire within organizations through strategy with soul consulting as founder and CEO of the Awakened Company. In 2022, Catherine was identified as one of the top 10 innovative CEOs, revamping the future by Inc. magazine. Author of the Awakened Company, Catherine's revolutionary business book was awarded the Nautilus Book Award in Business and Leadership, was a bestseller 1 week after its release, a bestseller on Amazon, chosen as 8 of the best leadership books in 2015, and recognized as a top book combining business and mindfulness. Catherine has been published in Fortune, HBR, which stands for Harvard Business Review, Profit, Conscious Company Magazine, Woman in Influence, and has written for the UN. She has worked around the globe from the UK to Cuba and with Fortune 500 companies to serial entrepreneurs. Catherine Bell on the Business of Intuition. Catherine, great to have you on the show. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Let me set up a situation that I think that you would probably resonate with, and I want to get your take on it. It seems to me that we have a very deep hunger right now for people to connect with themselves and to connect with each other. And part of the challenge is being distracted, that we're distracted with our cell phones and TikTok, and we're training our brains to be focused on the micro versus the macro. We're losing the ability to stay present for more than a couple of seconds before we move on to something else. We're getting really good at being human doers versus human beings. And that there's also a lot of fear still out there. And I think fear is probably one of those common characteristics that we have as a human being. But boy, there's been a lot. And maybe the pandemic not only created this little virus that went around the planet, but it created a lot of fear. And so I just noticed this coming back from an event that I did recently, that people getting back together and interconnecting in a live setting was, on one hand, for them, scary, that I've never seen before in 31 years. And the other hand, it was like water to a person who was thirsty. So I want to do this, I want to connect, but I'm also feeling very awkward about it. This connection with self, connection with other people. So what's your sense on this? What's going on right now in your world relative to connection, and also probably the spinoff around that might be creativity, intuition. What's up for you when I mention all this stuff?
First of all, thank you very much for having me, and thank you to everybody who's listening. I think we often forget the moment of connection, and right now we're in that moment of connection. And so often we go to automaticity instead of real connection with what is alive in the very precious moment that we're in. And so right now you and I are in this very precious moment together. And can we really be here? Can we drop into the intoxicatingness of now? So that is the essence of your question to me is that, are we really present and awake to what is around us now? Are we physically awake? Are we tapping into our senses? Right now, I can hear, I can see you. Now, we're not physically in the same space, so I can't smell, et cetera, et cetera. However, am I using my senses to fully in my body? And our bodies are finely tuned machines to be present with each other when society, in many ways, is programming us to be distracted, to be disconnected, to lose touch with source. Our cell phones, social media, for example, it's like every time we go, we're getting dopamine hits. And it's quick dopamine hits, not the long form of energy that we get when we're actually with somebody. So the invitation I would have for everybody is, often people wake up, they grab their cell phones. Wake up, give yourself a hug. Wake up and to give yourself a hug. Our first connection begins with our connection to ourselves, to our vertical alignment. And then when we're more connected to our vertical alignment, we can then act in the world from a different place, so that we become literally the vehicles of wisdom, love, and power, versus giving over our vertical alignment to the horizontal, which is, when I say horizontal, I'm meaning the doing in the world. And when what we most crave is being, and being together, and being in community, and being in relationship, in real relationship and relatedness. So for example, and that's something else I think we need to tease out, is in work, for example, we're often in roles. That is our role, not our relatedness. Our relatedness is our humanity. Our roles is our function as we relate to each other. And I think that's something very, very important to get in touch with. And we have epidemics around loneliness right now. And invitation for everybody to put down your cell phones and just be present to what is around you and how amazing that really is.
And how I mean, I'm thinking from my own experience, because there was like if you meditate, I find it wonderful and awful at the same time.
Mm.
Like I get into that space, but I also like can also create a whole symphony of thoughts in my head. And it's really can be very distracting what goes on. I'm not saying that I'm an Elon Musk kind of thinker, but I do think a lot and it's hard to turn it off. I'm a light sleeper because my brain is always going, and I don't know whether I'm alone in this, but I do think that part of me thinks that what you're saying is so right on, that we just need to be reconnected to ourselves and others. And yet there is something that is fearful for people to do that. Mm-hmm. Does it mean that my issues that I've been avoiding will start to come back to me? My regrets will come back to me. My concerns will come back to me. And all of a sudden, accountability and responsibility, and I mean responsibility, really being responsive to what your ability allows you to do, becomes at issue, and a confidence level to be able to manage that becomes at issue. So when you really look at a person who's really connected to themselves and others, you also find that people are also very responsible human beings, to being at source to their own direction and their own experience. And if you don't believe you have the ability to do that, because that's been trained out of you, however that came about, being present the way you described could be horrifying.
Mm. I love the way you brought in the mind, because the mind, you spoke about all these minds, and I saw like Linus with the cloud around him, like with all these ideas popping off all the time. And we desperately need our minds. So I don't believe when people say, get out of your mind. No, I'd say, get into your real mind. Get into your real mind. And why do I say get into your real mind? Because we wouldn't be able to drive down the street without our mind and knowing that we have to stay in between the lines. And our intentions matter. And that's where our mind comes into play. Are we setting? So we have about 60,000 thoughts a day. 85% are repeating. 95% of those are negative. So the invitation is, once we know that with leaders, the more self-aware we are as leaders, the higher performing we are. And this is based on business research. So how do we set positive intention? So, and I kind of have this philosophy of life. Now, it's based on three things. The first one is, if I'm worrying about something, if I'm concerned about something, can I do something about it? And if I can do something about it, what is the smallest micro action I can take to solve that? If I can't do anything about it, then I should just let it go, because there's no point in me letting my inner tinker toy go crazy on it, because I can't do anything about it. And the third one is, if I'm not clear on 1 and 2, just to wait, be patient. So just for everybody to really, I invite that philosophy and be aware of our thoughts, because our thoughts feed our reality. Our thoughts are very powerful. And our speech is very powerful. And I don't think people really realize how powerful our thoughts are, and how powerful our words are, like mantra, and our words are meaningful. So when we say things to the universe, it's almost like we're sending ripples out. So how can we have positive intention, positive action, positive speech to help create a different reality?
It's a great point. So give me an example of the ripple of a word or phrase that could be sending a ripple that is not going to create a good result. And then how could you say it in a different way that might have a different outcome? And I'm leading you into this because I think when you listen to people's how they articulate things, it's a mirror to their own attitudes and their own paradigms and their own sense of self. It's fascinating. So give us an example.
Well, and I teach a lot about the awake asleep line too. And I caught myself in a sleep place recently. So I hurt my knee playing tennis, flying to see a major client tomorrow. I'm on crutches. I can't fly. Well, you should have heard all the negative I had to myself. And then I'm like, hold up, wait a minute. And I literally flipped the switch and went to, what are all the possibilities that I can do? And how do I let this client know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it has blossomed as a result of being injured. So it was my attitude, my approach, my intention, and that switch of my intention is to serve this client. So how can I best serve this client given the conditions? And knowing that I'm of service, the client was like, yeah, let's just do it this way. And here's some more things we want you to do. And it just completely opened up like a flower. It was, it was unbelievable. But I also think we have to accept the present moment, and we don't, and not delude ourselves. I'm accepting that my knee is injured right now, and here's what I can do.
Versus what was the old way of thinking relative to your injury?
Versus, well, the old, so when I was below the line, it's like, I literally was in tears. I was like, what am I going to do? Can I force myself to do this? Which I can't. The client's going to cancel. The client will be so disappointed in me. I'm so disappointed in me, blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't at all serving. It didn't serve me or the client.
Sounds like you're referencing, if I may, Oz principle model, below the line, above the line, around accountability. You're not familiar with that? Oh, I thought you were giving us wow. So yeah, there's a whole accountability model that talks about being below the line or above the line. And below the line, basically, there's 7 or 8 different victim mindsets. Find ourselves in one way or another. And you probably had a little bit of that with respect to the beginning part of your experience with your knee or your leg. And then above the line is being responsible, meaning, and there's a whole process for that. But interesting that you didn't even realize you knew the book. Somehow you did know the book.
I use the concept of awake, asleep, because often you think we are awake or asleep, and I think of ABC. What's my attitude, behavior, commitment? So when I think of what's my attitude, what's my intention, my behavior, and what am I committing to when I'm above the line? But when I'm asleep, I am in that. If you look at I know the drama triangle. If you're in that kind of victim mindset, that's an opportunity to bounce right out of it. Because I do believe life is happening with us and for us in ways that if we drop into it, can we learn the lessons? Can we learn the lessons? And same with our context. I know you're really into intuition. So it was interesting because the number of our connections today was 12, right? Or 93, is that right? 93 connections. We had mutual connections.
Oh, you mean, so those of you who don't know, when we met on our call here before we hit the record button, we said, well, let's make sure that we are connected via LinkedIn. And I pulled up your name and I found out that we had 93 common connections. So that's what you're referencing. That's
right. So knowing that we have 93 connections, numbers mean a lot to me because numbers are objective. So when we look at numbers, I had 9 plus 3 is 12, and 1 plus 2 is 3. And for me, when there's 3, there's more than you and me. There's something else that's been guiding our conversation and that's guiding where we're going. And are we awake enough to pay attention to these little universal clues that are always here for us to pick up, to actually rest in and pay attention to? So when you said that to me, I got a little inner grin, and you probably didn't pick up on it.
No, I did not.
The invitation for everybody is to pay attention to the numbers that are around us, to the colors that are around us, so that they can inform us to make good decisions.
So you just took a pivot there. So let's go down that path. I'll play. So here, are you pulling in numerology that you're finding the 9 and the 3 and you're adding them together? Or what was that process? Kind of unpack that for us so that it doesn't get lost on the people who are listening to this.
So we've many traditions in what I do and how I work, but that was numerology in particular that I used there. And I've studied ancient Egypt. And the use of numbers there is powerful. So that is one thing that I use to help me to be present to what are the signals the universe is giving.
So what was the signal that, again, just sort of play into it more with, so Dean and Catherine have 93 common connections on LinkedIn.
So 93. So when you add the 9 plus 3, it equals 12. And when you add
Yes.
1 plus 2 together, it equals 3.
Yes.
And often, where there's challenges is when we feel divided, which is a sense of dualism. However, when we're connected, there's a third force that's actually our relationship that is more powerful than you and I as separate beings. It's our sense of relatedness. So tying it right back to what we were speaking about before, relationship and relatedness, is when we are present with each other, there's often a field that is far more powerful than any one of us individually. And how do we pay attention to that?
So the number 3 represents that.
That's right.
Whereas number 2 represents.
Typically, it can represent duality, which means separateness. It could be ego and spirit, horizontal versus vertical, versus the alignment is the third.
Okay, so I'm going to take this another. Okay, go ahead.
And look at your 30th anniversary. Like there it is again. There's the number 3 again, and you may not see it on your. But it says mission 30th anniversary facilitator.
Yeah.
So how do we pay attention to these universal clues as leaders to help us make great decisions?
All right, so I want to ask another question relative to this, and if it feels right to get into how do we apply this as leaders and team members, great, but we'll see. I had somebody on the podcast recently, like last week, and I think she said something to the effect, and it goes back to numerology, that we are entering into a phase from a numerology perspective, or maybe an astrology perspective, that we haven't seen since the Renaissance. Mm-hmm. And so I think she's pulling in numbers, she's pulling in astrology, the alignment of planets. So with your interest in numbers, and the date that we have right now, not this day in particular, but days that are coming up, let's say this is right now, what are we? We're February 7th, 2024. One, do you pay attention to dates? And do you derive meaning out of them based on the numbers they represent? And then number 2, are we in some sort of phase that the dates would indicate? And if so, what?
So, what a great question.
Do you need to go for a walk and come back and think?
So, what a great question. I believe that we need to tap into all of these more intuitive methods to live more fulfilling lives. And I think that part of our brains has really been not used as much as it could be. So there's a great documentary on the left brain, right brain that I'd suggest people watch. And this documentary argues that it's because of our overuse of the left brain, this propulsion to perpetually do. That's the challenge. And we need to tap into more of our artistic, our intuition, these ancient methodologies that you're speaking of. So for me, I weave in astrology into my life. I weave in indigenous practices as it relates to. You're making me go into my secrets. You know that, Dean. These are my secrets. Yeah. Well, I'm going into my secrets. So astrology, and then indigenous practices as it relates to when is a good time to plant good seeds for my life. Numerology, the Enneagram, and I also marry it with business best practices and practical know-how to help build more fulsome lives. So the answer is yes. And, we are at a very critical impasse in humanity's stage. And I would invite everyone just to drop into the moment and do the right things and come from the right place and take care of your friends, your family, your community, and good things will happen. It's just like, what are the tiny little things we can do every day to live good lives? And I'd say that should be an invitation for people to really focus on that and to have a personal aim, back to get to what we're speaking about around our thoughts because our thoughts also ripple out into the atmosphere. So you can imagine how many people on the planet have 60,000 thoughts a day, 85% repeating, 95% negative. What is the impact on our atmosphere? And how can we supplant that with positive intention, positive thought, using whatever method you see as appropriate to do so? So yes, I play with a number of wisdom traditions and business research and practical know-how. And I built Profit 20 firms and best workplaces, etc., by doing things radically differently.
Okay, so what's the name of the documentary?
Left Brain, Right Brain. It's a CBC documentary.
Okay, and you mentioned impasse. What is the impasse?
Or the impact? Impact is, I think, is what I said.
Oh, right now you said that society's at an impasse.
Oh, yeah, we are.
Because of the timing that we are. Humanity's at an impasse. So what does that mean? What is the impasse?
We're entering a time of radical change. Let's just put it that way.
What are you not saying, Catherine?
How come you can read me?
I can tell you the way you're carefully choosing your words. Like, come on. You're among friends here.
we're really at, AI. I think AI could help to solve some of the world's greatest challenges. And how do we use it for good? So we're at it. So I use that as an example because we are at such a poignant time that so many things are changing, and they're changing radically quickly. So for example, I recently heard of a student who learned their computer sciences program, a year-long program, in a weekend, thanks to artificial intelligence. So talk about the speed of change.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. Like, there we are in a time of radical realignment, reinvestment. And also, I think the world, like with what's going on in the world, it feels very turbulated. So how do we come back home to ourselves, to the present moment, to put into the world more grounding, more earth, more care, more love, more appreciation? And still, I think also we haven't seen many great examples of healthy power. And what the world is asking for now, as far as I'm concerned, is healthy power, which is love in action. For me, healthy power is love in action. So how do we first love ourselves and then act from that place? That to me is healthy power. So is this did that answer you?
It's good. And I'm gathering that some of this is something you're sensing and feeling, but also if you pull some of the other traditions, numerology, astrology, those particular art forms, distinctions, models would also probably reflect that. And I'm gathering that. I'm just going to, and you're shaking your head. Yes. So I gather that. I haven't done this in a while, but for a while, my wife and I would talk to a Vedic astrologer, maybe a couple times a year. And we had for years. And we kind of got to the point where we didn't as much, but it was like what I got from the astrology readings was these were the conditions that were in our life, but that intentionality could still create the reality we would want. Not to say that we are not subject to some of the external forces that whatever's happening from a numerology perspective or an astrology perspective, but that we don't have to be victim to them either, right?
That's right. And how do we also, when we know our astrology, then how do we know if the cosmos is what is above comes below, if it's a reflection of our potential lifelines? How do we know to get out of it? We wouldn't know to get out of it unless we understood it. So, for example, in my astrological chart, there's a real tendency to give my energy away. So I am very aware of that and how I'm mindful of it. I still have to work on it every day. So it's not like it goes away, but I am way more mindful of it because I know it. And then I also know it to be my experience when I reflect back on my life. And astrology is only a small part of what I study. I study the Enneagram in detail as well. So understanding what my hot buttons are there is it's been a big learning journey and a leadership journey.
How do you use Enneagrams in your work with companies?
So, number one is for people to understand what their Enneagram DNA is, to understand what maybe their core gifts, their core work-ons, and then also how to invite in the any other Enneagram types so that they can be more present as leaders. The highest performing leaders are those that are self-aware. So the Enneagram teaches leaders how to be more self-aware and more present. Really is a roadmap for how do we be more present in our lives when we're acting from default. So my acting from default is like I lean in, I force things to happen versus relaxing and letting things come to me, which actually this conversation has gone in a way that I never would have imagined. Like it's kind of like, okay, it's like you're opening up portals in me that, we're asking to be investigated. So how do I deal with that as a leader? So it really does. And then I work with teams to develop a team map for what is the team actually, what's their map. And one of the teams that I'm a serial entrepreneur, like I can't help but to build stuff. And one of the teams I co-led, there was certain points that were missing. So we deliberately put in norms and practices to bring out those energy types in all of us.
So really is he referring to energy types relative to Enneagram?
That's right. That's right.
So even when you mention a team map, say more what that is.
So it's putting everybody who's on the team, once they've identified what their core type is, let's say there's 3 1s, a couple 2s, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and seeing who is where on the map so that you can call on each other for ideas, for helpful practices, depending on type. Now, people are not their type, so I also want to make that clear. And in this particular team that I co-led, we were missing the 4 and the 5 energy, which is like the creative and the investigator. So what we did, Dean, is we put in practices and team norms so that we were more thoughtful and more creative in our team and the way we work together. So it creates wholeness.
So you're saying that although we didn't have the creative in the team, the norms said we need to lean into that gap.
That's right.
So this is an important distinction here. I think I want to call out here. We really are going all over the place, aren't we? Is that with some of these different types of tools, what I have noticed with a lot of them is that they honor the particular type that you might be. Call it DISC, call it Enneagram, call it social agility, or call it social styles, or true colors, Kobe, whatever they might be. And you appreciate the fact that you're different than I, and I from you. But what I find is interesting is, how do we then bridge the gap?
Mm-hmm.
How do we become more agile so that we remove the static that's keeping us from working best together? So the content of our intuition, our creativity, our information doesn't get choked off by a style that another person can't handle.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the fact that you mentioned the sort of the ability to include these guiding principles and lean into the area that the team might be missing.
Yes, and to build in process around that.
Yeah.
Because everybody has access to it. So for example, let's say you were a 7 and I'm an 8. So knowing that you're a 7 and if you are a 7 and
I don't know for sure.
Yeah, no. But let's just play here.
Yeah. So for the people listening, let's help them out.
Yeah.
From an Enneagram perspective, just give a quick sentence or two about what is a 7, what is an 8, just so they understand the context.
Very much. Great. Thank you. So a 7 is an enthusiast, and the 7 is really the brainstorming, ideas, possibilities. I call them the Pied Piper because people can't help but to kind of fall in love with them and follow them because they've got this aura of joy. And at the same time, what's kind of underneath the aura of joy is anxiety. Like they have so much going on in their head. It's like, it's unbelievable. It's like a forest is there. And if you want ideas, just ask them. Boom, 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 boom.
It certainly feels Kind of right there, Catherine.
To be investigated, right? to be investigated when you have time, and
then what's the 8 that?
The 8 is the challenger, and the challenger has like, I have a strong desire to have a big impact. Like, I walk in the room and you'll palpably feel me. Like, and I can't help but, if I feel like an underdog, someone's hurting an underdog, I can't help but to want to protect them. So so if you are a 7 and me as an 8, we have a lot of this go forward energy. There will be ideas popping. Like on this podcast, we could speak for hours, and we could, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like, there's this go forward, and the invitation when you have the assertive, which is like this your positive outlook, and I'm really what I'm a real impact. We could be more competent. We could kind of use a list, follow the list. Like, that would be the invitation, and yours and my dynamic. Just knowing, because there's 3. Are you emotional realness? Are you positive? Or are you competent? And the 7 is positive. The 8 is emotional realness. And what we're missing is a competency, which is like where you said the conversation kind of went everywhere. Yeah, that's us. We will pop open everything.
Competency, like somebody that will ground us and help us execute on all these big ideas.
You got it. Boom, boom, boom. They're the list makers, the process people.
So Melissa on my team, guess what role you're playing? She's already that way. She knows that. She's got this. This is one of our dearest people in our lives, and she helps run our business, and that's who she is for us. And my wife, Joanne, she's another big idea person, and she's the one who's taking notes and making sure that we have project plans and challenges us on the ability to get it done. And we go, you're right. We probably don't have enough time for that. So definitely, and we are blessed to have that balance.
Yeah. And we all have gifts to bring to the table. And do we see them?
Yeah.
Do we see them? And then also, do we how to kind of balance it off? Like, you and I are perfectly capable also of being competent when we need to be. 100%. We can do it once we know it. But if we don't know it, that's when the challenge comes in. And often I find, like, you know how horses have like blinders on them when often I feel like leaders have blinders on. Like, they're just so focused on their thing that they miss the 360-degree perspective, which is what the Enneagram really helps us to have.
Do you notice that if we keep on this topic of the Enneagram, that a team will have a signature number, or a company will have a signature number?
Oh my goodness, what a great question. Yes. The signature number is often all the shadow of the leader's type.
Say that again. All the shadow
of the leader's type.
Let's say you have a 7 leader and they are leading a company. What's the shadow of that 7?
All of the positive things that I spoke about, because I see it all as shadow. Because
shadow to me, I think, as a kind of a dark side, like a negative.
No, not
good
at
and
all.
bad. No.
When I say shadow, I'm meaning good and bad. So let's say a 7 leader. The ideas in the organization are going to be popping. Like, this will be an idea generation company. There are going to be great brainstorming sessions. There are going to be brilliant ideas. There's going to be brilliant roadmaps, brilliant questions. There also may be some anxiety. It may not be as grounded as it could be. What it would benefit from would be to have a lot of people who are really thoughtful, who can think things through, and also people who are very, very detail oriented. Kind of work with all the shadow, because we're all just shadow. Like, it's all just shadow play. It's all a play on, what does my teacher say? It's all a play on basic space.
Basic space?
Yeah. So it's all exactly the ground.
I feel, what does that mean? Basic space.
The ground of being, just being here now. Everything around us is really a play on basic space. Isn't that a beautiful saying?
No, it is. I wasn't sure what it meant, but now that I understand it, it makes sense.
Yeah.
So basically what you're saying, going back to the Enneagram and the leader, is that the leader sets the tone for the culture, which kind of makes sense. We all know that. But can with the movement around business these days, and culture creation, there would almost be this idea that cultures can be created, that cultures can be the reflection of and the energies of a lot of people, maybe the entire company, which then would say it's not created by the leader. It's this collaborative soup that creates the culture. So how do we then, what works here? I mean, is it truly that, or is it the leader always trumps out in the end?
Oh,
or it's something in between, or both?
It's both. So Awaken Company book is how to create healthy cultures. And Business Alchemy is when we have 2/3 focus on business culture, 1/3 on financial results. And where I've made my greatest mistakes as a leader is when I become a dictator. That's where I've made the biggest mistakes, because truly when I've created vision with team, values with team, something more powerful emerges. So that alphabet soup that you're speaking of, with all the different letters of the alphabet swimming in the soup, so that everybody owns the culture. Back to one of Margaret Wheatley's principles, which is people support what they create. And culture is how we treat each other. It is the glue in organizations. So unless we've got collectively defined vision, values, cultural metrics, etc., organizations won't thrive. But we need to what you're saying, we need to bring the humanity back into our organizations. And the humanity involves also this intuitive aspect of all of ourselves that you have really been tapping into with your work. It's very, very, very important.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
True.
So to finish this chapter on cultures and leaders, so if we can create our culture based on what you just defined, and yet there's also the leader who, I don't mean to sound so hierarchical, but I do, but sometimes it sounds really good, what you just described. Is it something that we find actually happens? Meaning, in the end, does the leader have 2 votes to everybody else's 1 when it comes to the culture, because their style, the Enneagram, the shadow, the pieces that you just described just have a little bit more energy and potency than the collective that might be going in a different direction that is maybe the right direction. Maybe we've got a powerful leader who also is somewhat narcissistic, that is eroding part of the culture, but that doesn't ever sort of change because it's got more energy, more power, greater votes, more cards, more chits, all of that, than the company that's trying to create a culture that's going in a different direction.
So, great question. I went and sat on Wall Street when the protests were against Wall Street. And it made me realize where a leaderless movement doesn't work. We need leadership. And I believe everybody is a leader. And I believe in the hierarchical model, the leader has mirrors all around them. What do I mean by that? They're positively reinforced all the time for whatever they do, because people see their association with them as being directly impacted in their own well-being, et cetera, et cetera. The invitation is for leaders to become more circular and more focused on paying attention to the collective. So I do believe we need leadership, and I think we're in that. Over the decades I've been working at this, I see it's happening slowly. And I think it's going to happen faster as a result of future generations.
So to put it simply, we need leaders to define and move us in a direction. We also need leaders who create culture.
Yes.
And that collaborative, intuitive culture. So there's that, it almost feels like in some ways that they are opposing each other. But in fact, they're not. I mean, it's like the left brain, the right brain. They both need to work together. The mind and the brain, they both need to work together, right? And sometimes we will maybe be more about leadership and leading direction, moving forward, doing, and other times we maybe more about cultivating the culture. So I think you're right, it is an and.
And how do we be present to what is most needed? That is the invitation for leaders. And leadership can be taught, which is what I'm doing with this Awaken Company certification, because often I find it's just working with a leader who, dropped their one-page strategic plan when they got their financing. And so helping leaders to understand how important their role is and how to lead is what I'm going to be getting into with this certification. And I'm super excited because it's the first time I've ever done it. And I'm super excited to share because I've been teaching it in top business schools for decades. So it's about time. I think if I wonder why it took me so long. I think it was confidence. I'm now feeling like I'm confident to do it. And it feels good. And I'm excited to do it, to teach leaders how to lead their organizations, relationships, and corporate cultures.
Well, Catherine, you were right. We could talk for hours. So I will probably say, let's find a way to tie this thing into a nice little bow by asking, how can people follow you? Where do they go online to learn about the certification program? What sort of books do you have that you would love them to know about, et cetera?
Thank you very much for asking me. So Awakened Company, contact us, our newsletter, join our newsletter because our newsletter provides actionable information. So join our newsletter under contact us. Awakened Company certification, you'll see under awakencompany.com. And there's the Awakened Company certification in the top left-hand corner. And the Awakened Company book is on Amazon. So please give it a read. There are more books coming on creativity and on how to actually build awakened organization, which is what I'm teaching in the Awakened Company certification. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. So join us there as well.
Final thought. Final hope.
I get to see you in Banff, Canada, skiing.
Oh, good. I didn't expect it to be about moi.
There you go. So we'll see each other in Canada.
I would love that. That would be fun. That would be really great.
Awesome. Okay.
Canada's been really fun.
It's been great. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet.
Thank you for listening to The Business of Intuition. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com.